Okay, welcome back. It's probably been over a week since the last time I did a video. I haven't been working on the car as much as I'd like, more than my wife would like it for sure. But hopefully this isn't too bad light there. But progress wise, I got the turbos mounted and the oil system all hooked up, and I actually was able to run it a little bit, test it out, and right away noticed I got a issue with oil coming out of the turbos, you know, both out the compressor side and both on the exhaust side. So I've been fighting that for quite a few days. What I ended up doing so far was I replaced that A-Marine pump, you know, the Chinese pumps from eBay, with a little bit better one from TurboWorks, a Spartan model. It doesn't have the rated flow, but seems to be a better unit. And I also added a 40 thousandths orifice to my before my T going in turbo. So even having said that, I did those things, and I'd run and right away I get a lot of smoke and a lot of just basically oil dripping out of the anywhere there's a weld flaw or a seam in the turbos or whatever, or anywhere bearing seals. So you start to think, okay, I have too much oil going in, or do I have too much oil coming out? Or shouldn't say it that way. I mean, too much oil going in, or not taking it out fast enough based on what's going in. And so last night I did a test, actually a few tests, where I well, the first test was, is my pump actually running and sucking, and you know, determined that it is. And I did a test to figure out, okay, if I take my line going back to the oil cooler off, I mean the oil pan off, where's my oil coming from my into my turbos? Is it running back from the oil pan through the pump, back through the outlet, and then, you know, basically filling up the ball bearing casing in there and then running out the seals, or is it coming from the pressure side? So first test I did was I took the pump out as I was replacing it, and actually it was pretty fortunate that there was, even when I pulled the hose down below the level of the oil pan, there was no oil coming back out of the oil pan, so my drain side line is good. So the second test I did was, you know, I grabbed this quart container, and what I did was I just hooked up a line off the oil drain port on one of the turbos, and I started the car, and I ran it for about 20 seconds. I counted off, and you know, and see how much oil I would get in this tub. And it actually wasn't that much oil. It was maybe maybe like an eighth of the container, and at 20 seconds was filled with oil. And I don't know flow wise if that's more or less what it needs, but so that was my oil coming out. At that rate, over 20 seconds, maybe an eighth of a quart. And then the second test I did was, while I was running, I took the suction line, one of the T's, and I put it into the container here, and I counted how fast it would pull the oil back up. You know, the same oil that took 20 seconds to fill this quart container emptied out in about 3.5–4 seconds. So it's, suction wise, it seemed to be that the pump could keep up with the demand of the, or keep up with the flow as it's going through bearing housings, and so right there and there is, at that time I was sucking from both bearings. Of course I have oil everywhere But so then they start to just run the car for a while, everything hooked up, and let it naturally burn whatever oil may be in the or leak through the bearing, just to see what would happen. And sure enough, there's a lot of oil in the exhaust right now. But over time, the exhaust would clean up. There'd be no smoke, and there'd be no evidence of oil coming out of the turbos after it ran for a while. Although you would still maybe see a little bit of a whisper on the exhaust sides if you'd rev it. So my thought was that I got a cold start issue where turbos would fill up basically as this thing sat, and and voila, you have oil with only one place to go, and that's out the seals eventually. So last night, as I went to bed about maybe 12:30 or so, I hooked this little line up to the turbo outlet, the oil outlet, and they just set the quart container underneath there, and overnight, it's maybe a little bit more than an eighth full, but so it's, to me it seems like quite a bit of oil. And it's kind of, there was hints of this in the past that when I took the oil pan off to drill the holes and I had this thing sitting for a few days dry, I also had the oil sensor port opened up, basically where I hooked up my T now for these lines, and it would keep dripping for days, and sure enough, this thing, I didn't capture all the oil that dripped out. I had it open for a while before I actually put the container underneath there, but I'd imagine that my oil is coming through. So my next step is to I'm going to put like a 5 psi check valve in the pressure line just to make sure it shuts off. But in the brief instances I did run it, this car's got a rev limiter, so it's basically 2750 RPMs is its max unless you put in gear. But being an old car paid for it, I actually did put it in drive, and with both turbos hooked up, I plumbed them up to the intake, and I just start revving it up, just to see what I would get after I maybe when I get out from underneath here I can show you what I did for the boost and temperature gauges. But that took about a day to hook up. But I was able to, I just revved the engine up over a couple times or a couple days, and sure enough, about 3,500 RPMs, you start to see the boost gauge come off zero. My first try, it went real quick. I saw it climbing, and I let it off because this car is not tuned yet. There's nothing done to the engine control modules or anything. So I saw it hit about 4 psi boost, and then it just let off. And I know it's not underneath load, and I wasn't really worried about any real issues. And the second time I did it, I let the RPMs climb up a little bit higher. I don't know if I got to maybe 6 or right thereabouts. It happened pretty fast, but I was pushing 7 psi boost. So it means my minimum setting when the turbos, I'm not sure when the wastegate's opening up, but my thought is maybe I need to do something to let the wastegates open up a little bit lower if I want to be able to control the boost lower than its minimum setting. So I'm thinking maybe I need to go to McMaster Car and get some die springs to help the piston extend, because these are sealed units. I can't change the spring inside. I'm not sure how I would tackle getting a different actuator. The other possibility is to try to get a longer knuckle here and see what I can do to take a little bit more tension off. But usually if you're trying to set up these things for a minimum, you want to, with the wastegate closed, still have to pull the piston about 1/8 of an inch out, so there's still some residual force on that wastegate to keep it shut. I guess before I get out from underneath here, a little bit on wiring.